All right, let's respond to some straw man arguments that were made against your old buddy Josh regarding my inflation discussion yesterday. It's a guy in here in particular, he knows better than this. Anyway, so let's dive into this. First, we're going to define what a straw man argument is. All right. A straw man argument is a fallacy, essentially. It can mean different things depending on the context. It can mean a weak or imaginary opposition that is set up to be easily defeated. That's exactly what a straw man argument is, right here. It's a form of argument and a formal fallacy of leaving the impression that you're refuting an argument that was never made. So let's, like for instance, straw man arguments are it's just weak stuff, man. Don't do that. Don't do that. And there's so many straw man arguments, man. It's all over. And again, what is happening? Just let me give an example. You are setting up an argument so you can beat it down, knowing full well that that argument was never offered to begin with. That's what a straw man is. And so you say, see, I showed you. I'm trying to think of a good example other than this right here. We'll just bypass that. There's so many, and I just don't feel like going. Like, geez. All right, so let's start with the main one here. We got this one right here. And this guy comments, and I'm like, dude, I can't, like, this guy, he's been around here a long time, man. A long time. I could not believe he said this. Because I'm like, dude, let's see right here. Inflation in any single year is not the problem, and it can usually be accommodated with some relatively minor adjustments to spending. The danger is when high inflation sticks around for several years in a row and gradually works its way into every facet of the economy, and at that point it becomes much more difficult to avoid and starts pecking away at your overall quality of life. 100%. I don't have any issue with that at all. All right. I consider inflation retirement to be the rough equivalent of lifestyle creep. A little bit is okay, but not tamed in short order become a noticeable drag on your finances. I completely agree with that. As a lifestyle creep, a little bit is in order, but if it becomes high, it can be a noticeable drag on your finances. I say, how do you measure inflation? Because this is the issue. This is the issue. Everyone wants to use CPI to measure inflation. I literally don't know why people don't get this. It's the weirdest thing to me. It's strange. I'm going to show you some other ones too. It is so odd that people say, when you ask them, well, how do you measure inflation? What I'm getting at is, how do you measure inflation? For you. But CPI, why would you use CPI to measure your inflation? And so what this guy says, when the cost to maintain my standard of living goes up year over year. Okay, again, maintain standard of living, which is not what the CPI measures. So how do you quantify specific inflation? I don't know how else more clearly I could be here. I agree with everything you guys said. How do you measure inflation? When the cost to maintain my standard of living goes up, that's not what CPI measures. So how do you measure it? Why is this so difficult to answer? And this guy says, if you're going to make the argument that it doesn't cost me more to have the same or similar lifestyle than it did a year ago, my checkbook will tell you the difference. And I'm like, that's the straw man. Did I make the argument that it doesn't cost me more to have the same or similar lifestyle than it did a year ago? I do not. This inflation stuff is the weirdest thing, because the Republicans, the conservatives, like, inflation, it's like this is their way to get Biden. And I get it, man. I get it. It's like their way to say, we're going to stick it to Biden by saying how bad it is. Look, I get it. I'm trying to, though, take you. Pablo, stop. Every single time. It's like he has this weird. You can do this. You can come up here. Everyone wants to see you anyway, but you don't need to. Oh, Finney just puked everywhere. It's disgusting. I spent like an hour cleaning up puke. Oh, man. He got the grease from my smoke. I've been smoking stuff, and I threw the grease out in the yard. I threw it in my. I should have thrown it over the fence, but I threw it in my backyard, kind of towards the back there, and he started licking it up. And man, he didn't eat this morning, and then he just puked everywhere. It's disgusting. It's like, bleh. Anyway, so the issue is right here. I agree with everyone this guy says. Inflation is a lifestyle creep, but how do you measure it? And saying how do you measure it is not the same as saying I'm not arguing that it doesn't cost more to live. I'm not arguing that. It's crazy to me. This is nuts. And he goes, what's straw man about something as empirical as staying on a budget that's been very consistent over the years? Okay, so we're arguing about silly stuff. Then this other guy shows up here. Just because you can massage the CPI categories to support your conclusion that fixed annuities will net enough after-tax income to cover your reality CPI, what if you're wrong? What if I'm wrong? Oh, this guy's new. I've never seen this guy around here before. He's got a tie and a suit on, so I can tell he's a financial advisor. And someone has their retirement family's legacy on your advice. What if the annuity rates are lower upon renewal? Well, first of all, I never said you put everything into your annuity, silly guy, silly. If you invest in here's where this guy gets it wrong. If you invest in a balanced portfolio and inflation is anywhere near its 90 or even 20-year average, 90-year average, what does that do? It goes back to 1926. Why are we starting in 1926? Because this is what the silly people do. That's the day that Roger Ibbotson, it used to be at Chicago, University of Chicago in the 70s, if memory serves. He came out and said, Roger Ibbotson, 1926, the day of the modern era. So what happened before that? At least start in 1913 when the Fed was around. Why not do that? Yeah, it doesn't make any sense. But anyway, so this is where the industry, again, I did a video on this, that there are not a lot of deep thinkers in the industry. It's just not. There are some. They're not that many, though, unfortunately. They look at Ibbotson chart and say, it's called stocks, bonds, something inflation, SBBI, stocks, bonds, something in inflation. I can't remember the SBBI, Ibbotson. And they'll go back to 1926. And it'll just show you, look, in 1926, the Dow was at 1, and now it's at 35,000. And they'll never log it. They'll never log the graph or anything. It's just this. It just drives you up the wall. I'm not going to lie, it drives you up the wall. All right, so keep going now. So if a balanced portfolio inflation is anywhere near its 90 or even 20-year average, are we literally saying, so he's saying, what if the annuity rates are lower upon renewal? If a balanced portfolio and inflation are anywhere its 90-year average, I will have enough to maintain my lifestyle as well as leave a legacy to my family. With your recommendations, this isn't the case. He doesn't know that. I submit it's actually much riskier because one would have the financial cushion in later years of life when it's most needed. Okay, so we're not even going to talk about, there's no evidence of people spending more as they get older. The evidence is not there. They'll always use an anecdote. Grandma, I'm not a new rookie to this here, guy. Just because I don't wear a suit doesn't make me less informed. I said, if you want to use historical averages, well, be my guest. I don't. Dive deeper, amigo. Start by reading some older literature on the topic. Robert Soldovsky is a good place to begin. So let me tell you what I'm talking about there, as I've done a million times a Sunday. This is a clipping from newspapers.com. Challenging the popular market, the stocks as an inflation hedge. Challenging the popular market view. And again, this is from 1976. How leading stocks have performed since 1910, and we see a bunch of years, 1910 to 1919, 1930 and 1939, 1970 and 1976, where stocks were not a hedge against inflation. It's just all there is to it. And if you take certain time frames in there when you're spending down your assets, and another thing with this guy, just Japan. How can people always overlook Japan? It's silly to say if the stocks and bonds did this, then your risk is more. Anyway, so he's right. If the stocks and bonds, stocks, bonds, something in inflation, it's cash, but they don't call it cash. SBBI. I'm positive that's what it's called. Anyway, so if stocks and bonds and inflation do relative to what they did in 1990, for the last 90 years on average, yes, you'd be better off in a balanced portfolio, 100%. Most likely than a fixed annuity. I got no problem with that. I don't think it's going to happen. In fact, I worry more than anything is about a 2008. That's where people lose their shirts. You know who didn't lose their shirts in 2008? People with fixed annuities. All right, there's another straw man. Let's keep going. This isn't a straw man, but she, again, misunderstood. And I don't think it's my fault, Frank. I think people, when they hear the word, it's kind of like if you talk about the moon landing, because we all know it's a hoax, and people say, oh, the moon landing, they lose their minds. When you talk about the moon landing as a hoax, they say, it's crazy. Oh, they can't hear any argument outside of this. And Carla, she's been around, so she's good. But she made a point that was not made by me. She goes, I think in your scenario, housing costs go down dramatically when you own, but there are costs of property taxes and homeowners insurance and maybe even utilities factor in. If these things are added into the cost of ownership, the percentages go up a lot. And I said, we didn't get rid of all housing inflation, only OER and rent. OER and rent. And I guess, so going back to this guy, look, if you're going to use CPI, you're not judging inflation based on maintaining a standard of living, which is the point of inflation. Okay, so let's keep going back. Hold on a second. All right, so I'm the Sam Kinison of so I guess that's kind of funny. All right, so here's Bill Carson. Inflation does not hit a retired person with everything paid for. So he's saying, I said that if you have everything paid for, you don't get hit with inflation. You sure? And that's just freaking dumb, dude. I'm like, dude, wow, didn't know I said that. That's weird. And he goes, no, what's weird is giving people a false impression that inflation isn't a concern if you have everything paid for. So your guy thinking he bought a 5% annuities cover for some reason. I guess a person could boondock, and there, just the whole thing's freaking stupid, man. I said, Strawman, you asked for comments, and then this is even worse. And this is gamma stuff, man. And I'd ban this guy, but I don't want to ban him yet because I want to do a video on it. And I'll ban him at some point because it's just stupid. It's a stupid argument. I'm so sick of. I don't have time for stupidity because you can't look, man. Very few people actually comment on videos. But you have to destroy the ones that do who comment in just idiotic ways. Because I'm not saying this guy's idiotic. I'm not calling a person. I'm saying his argument is idiotic. Because he's strawmanning me. And strawmanning me is such a silly, silly thing to do. And it's so easy to debate and destroy. But you can't have that all the time. Strawmans need to be defeated because they're gammas. And what they do is say, I'll tell you, sir, you are wrong. And you're just like, oh, it's just so old and embarrassing. Anyway, so let's keep going. You asked for comments below. You just want the ones that agree with. I said, I didn't delete your comment, but you're using a straw man argument. Well, I would hope you would not delete the truth, just accept it. Well, and I mean, at least if you're going to freaking come after me, accept it, because accept is, you're a straw man. You're not a straw man. You're just talking about his typo. Only because he's being kind of aggressive towards me, and yet he comes to accept it. All right, so the straw man here is, of course, I never said inflation does not hit a person who's paid for everything. That's just stupid. To say that is just obviously inherently you didn't watch the video. And I get it, man. A lot of people comment. I got my man Dougie from Jesus Words Only videos, and he comments a lot. He has to beat back these comments a lot. I said, Doug, people just don't watch the video. You can tell. I get this on my channel a lot. They don't watch. They'll comment before the video's over. French apps all the time. I've done this a couple times with one guy. Is Graham Stephan guy? And I don't watch him anymore. I just don't have. I'm not that interested in other people's take on finances, to be honest with you. But I like Graham Stephan. I like that Me Kevin guy. They're entertaining. I just don't watch him anymore. But anyway, he posted a video, and about taxes. I forgot what it was, and he was about 3/4 of the way through, and he did not take out standard deductions. And so I commented before watching the whole thing, and I said, man, you got to take out standard deductions, Graham. What are you doing? You know what I'm saying? And then I watched the rest after I posted a comment, and he did say standard deductions. So it's a little bit too down the road, in my opinion. But be that as it may, he did say it, so I deleted my comment. So I have done the same thing, too. I've done where you don't watch the whole video and you're commenting. My man, Brett Weinstein, and Heather, what's his wife's name? Heather something, Heather Hying, something like that. He posted a video, and I was commenting while I was watching it, talking about the Eddington experiment validating Einstein. He didn't even come right out and say the Eddington. But I said, please tell me you're not going to say Eddington. And sure enough, he said Eddington. So I was like, oh. So I posted a comment about how Eddington was a lot, basically bordering on fraud. And I said, I'm ready to delete that comment if Brett backtracks a little bit and says there are some issues with Eddington. I'm ready to delete it. Because I am going to watch the whole thing through, and he never did say that. So I left the comment out there. And I don't know if he deleted my comment or not. I don't know. But the issue is if you're going to comment without watching the whole video, I mean, just it's silly, man, because you're being a gamma male. All there is to it. And we don't need more gamma males. On this channel, we don't. Gamma males will be banned. The first guy with a car, he's not usually like this. So I didn't know what, I'm not quite, this guy right here, he's been around a long time. Not quite sure what was, drew his ire though. Why he would, basically straw man me. I was kind of disappointed to hear that, because you see some people are long time commenters, and you come to rely and respect what they have to say. In this case, not much, and it was disappointing actually. So what's happening here, my man John T? What you ideally want is a high CPI, yes, which goes up every year with a low personal inflation rate. Yes, 100%. You want a high CPI, which is exactly what happened last year, with a low personal inflation rate, because guess what? You get the benefit of CPI, which doesn't measure your inflation. More to come. All right, love your thoughts. That is true, Bill. I do like to hear your thoughts. If you're going to gamble me with straw man, I'm going to ban you, though, because it's silly. It's boring. We don't need straw man. If we want to get into debate, that's fine. We can, like this guy right here. This guy, I don't agree with his assessment necessarily. My man Richard, a few flaws, lots of elderly rent. Not that many rent. Not that many rent. The numbers are 80 to 85% of elderly people are homeowners. So, but not only that, who cares what other people do? Who cares if they do rent? Do you rent, Richard? No, so why do you care about OER or the cost of rent? It doesn't make any sense. Again, property taxes keep increasing. No one ever said they didn't. House maintenance costs keep rising. No one ever said they didn't. So frustrating. No one said there isn't any inflation. We're saying the CPI isn't a good gauge of inflation. Thus, calculate your personal inflation rate. Why is this so flippin' hard? I did the video where I showed you the data set, what I was using. OER, or the shelter cost, went from 47 to basically 10 because of OER and rent. Transportation costs went from 15 to basically 7.5. Everything else stays the same. It's the weirdest thing how people don't get this, man. I literally did not say. All right. Well, actually, I want to show you something else here. They're making the same fallacies as this guy, who's very well known in the financial planning realm. I'm not going to say his name because it pisses me off, dude. This guy was very, very aggressive towards me, actually. I said, loved it. So he wrote a book, an article, and he's usually a pretty level-headed guy. So I challenged him on it. The main one being that retiree spending increases each year with inflation. Obviously, how do you measure inflation? We're not going to talk about that here, but just where's the evidence of that happening? And I said, I would love to see evidence of retiree spending increasing with inflation. And then he said, please stop at a gas station or grocery store. Look at a property tax bill. I could go on and on. And we're going to talk about retirement spending smile later on in the book. I'm not getting to here. I said, so your argument for long-term retirement spending increasing tracking inflation is based on my going to the gas station or grocery store today? Remember, we're trying to model long-term plans for inflation. Hey, do not bark in my ear. My ear is right here. No, that hurts my ear. I don't hear well as it is, Pablo. Your argument for long-term retirement spending increases tracking inflation is me going to the gas station right now. So again, if the price of gas is lower, which it is, does that mean there's deflation? To use an inflation-adjusted spending dynamic based on the price of gas or food for today is simply not logical. To say that healthcare costs will be the catalyst to retiree spending increases leaves a lot to be desired too. Again, I said I'd welcome any evidence. University of Michigan, Consumer Expenditure Survey, Health and Human Resources, anything. What's the other one? PFID, I think is what it's called. And he didn't have anything. And then he says, just like the other guy, if I can't convince you of the realities of inflation or health science for that matter, because this guy was big on the jabbies, big on the jabby jabs. Anyone question the jab? Baby boomers, man. I hate to say it. A lot of you baby boomers just love science and the white lab coats. You're like, ugh. And I suspect some of your clients will come back to you and ultimately they'll convince you. And he says basically, since you spent your whole career researching spending retirement, could you? And I just silly. All right, so again, the same thing as this guy said, literally verbatim almost right here. I'm not gonna be able to find him. This guy right here, basically because he's saying you're gonna have health shocks in the future, essentially, with increasing costs of spending. And it's just the evidence isn't there to validate that. It's just not there. Doesn't mean there's not inflation. It just means as you get older, the spending that you have increased relative to the price of goods will be offset by dropping other places for sure. Now, that doesn't mean applicable to everybody. I'm just trying to say, if you're using the CPI as an inflation gauge, and the whole point of inflation is to maintain your standard of living, you're wrong. That's a fact, Jack. All right, would love to hear your thoughts. We'll see you.